In today's lesson, I'm going to show you how to draw a unique and endangered mammal from Africa called a pangolin. If you'd like to follow along, you can download the pangolin image I'll be using from the link in the description box below the video. So pause this video to gather some pencils and paper, and then we'll begin. We'll be drawing a species known as the white-bellied tree pangolin, which inhabits forests in equatorial Africa. It lives in trees where it hunts for ants and termites with its very long tongue. It also has a very long tail it uses for balance when climbing. In this video, you can see a pangolin pup who is catching a ride on its mother's tail. Tragically, this species is endangered with extinction, so the more you know about it, the better you can protect it. So let's get started drawing our white-bellied tree pangolin. Don't rush to draw, observe. That'll save you time. Then I'm going to just kind of mark the edges of my paper about helping me to know where I'm going to put my drawing, because a lot of times it's easy to get one part too big and then not have room for anything else. Then I'm going to kind of just air draw very lightly where the animal is going to be on the page. Just thinking about really gentle oval for the body. Kind of like an egg shape for the body, noticing its width here and its length. You can really never spend too much time doing that. Looking at that arched back and then that tiny, tiny head. So notice it's a tiny little triangle. And we'll do a close-up of the head later, so don't worry. We're just placing the basic triangles and rectangles first. So super lightly. Then that back foot is mostly in shadow, so you don't see that too much, so don't worry. And then the tail. Notice the tail is as big as the rest of the body in terms of its length and its width. So don't be afraid to go all the way to the edge of your paper and down to the bottom and have it curl around, because this white-bellied pangolin species does have the second longest tail of any of the species, of all 8 species, and it is arboreal, so it uses that super long tail for holding on. Okay, so now we're going to move to the head. So I gave you a close-up view here on the left. Going to kind of measure the head from the neck area there and the forehead. And just noticing we've kind of got this triangle here. And remember, it's got a tiny little snout. It hardly even opens its mouth. It just sticks out that long, sticky tongue. So don't make that too big. And noticing how long and how wide it is. You can see just a little bit of his cheek and his jowl right there. Getting its forehead, and there's a little angle to the forehead and the jowl. And now just kind of cleaning up those edges a little bit. It'll be pretty smooth because there aren't too many scales there and they're pretty small. Gonna get the cute little snout there with the opening of the nostril. And I'm just gonna give him a little bit of a mouth opening. You can't see much of it, but just a little bit of a mouth, because we're gonna add a tongue later on coming out at the very end. The cheek, and then the eye. And notice where the eye is in relationship to the neck and the cheek. And the shape of it. I'm going to freeze this for a second. So I didn't do this, but you might want to notice, because this eye is really nice close up. You can see it really well. That just like us humans, it's got some white along the edge there, the white of the eye. And then it's got a colored part that's kind of brown. And then it's got a little black pupil in the middle. And so that's kind of small to add those things, but you might be able to do that. I just shadowed mine with a little tiny highlight like you can see here. But if you want to add that white kind of crescent because it looks like he's sort of looking back and to the left, so that white is showing. And then you can shade darker the pupil if you want, leaving a white area for a highlight. So it's really important to, make your animal look alive by giving it some personality with that eye. And you see that there are some hairs on the face that you can add later on. I'm not going to do that now, but just noticing that there are some hairs on the face and no scales. And then he's got little tiny ears. So I'm just drawing a super tiny crescent, but you can't really see it very well from this angle. It's sort of in shadow. And firming up the forehead. Thinking about where we're going to go next, making sure you've made that eye big enough. You could probably make your eye larger than I did. Mine looks a little sleepy, but yours could be a little bigger. Especially the nocturnal species have relatively larger eyes. Okay, so now we're going to do the rest of the body. And as we go up and over, keep that line super light, because as you can see that since his back is arched, the scales are kind of sticking out in sort of a zigzag patterns. We're going to want to show that a little bit at the end. So don't make that a super firm line because that's going to be zigzaggy. Now we're going to do the tail, that big tail. So really observe how big it is. It's kind of going horizontally first, and then it's going to wrap around. Going way over to the side of the paper, and I'm just making short little marks here because that's easier than trying to make a big long oval. And it's sort of challenging because I can't turn my paper to make this ergonomic. So I suggest that you turn your paper whatever way you need to, depending on if you're left or right-handed, to be able to do those curves in a more beautiful, gentle way. Because you can see my curves are kind of a little bit too flat here, and I would like it probably to be a little bit more well-rounded. And you can see in the image to the left a lot better and closer than I could see when I was drawing it, hopefully. So you might want to make it a little bit more a pretty gentle curve than I did. Now, you can also see in the larger image to the left that there's some shadowed area under the tail that we're going to add. So I'm kind of noticing, looking, double checking the edge of the tail and firming it up a little bit, although again, not too hard because that's going to be zigzaggy a bit because of those scales, just like the shingles of the roof of a house. So I'm just going to still keep that pretty light, but just a little bit darker so that I can erase some of my beginning try lines. And then noticing there is sort of a light area on the underside of the tail that gets really dark and in shadow towards the base of the tail. So right now I'm just drawing the top that you can see. And I'm going to clean up my edges a bit. I'm going to slow down here again, just to show you again that, so my tail is a little bit flattened in here. So I'd love to have you try to make yours a nice, prettier, gentle curve, because you can turn your paper and make it more ergonomic for you to do an arched line. Just noticing that mine's a little bit flat here. It could be prettier if I did it better. And also noticing that there is this underside of the tail that we can barely see. That's one reason I give you the larger images in these tutorials, because it's not easy to see in this photograph over here. So anyway, we will be drawing this line of the underside of the shaded part of the tail. And then when it gets into the sun, you can see it's kind of this pretty golden color. And then it arches over here as well. Okay, we're going to keep going now. So just cleaning up the arch of the tail, because this is the one time I'm showing you the close-up of the tail. So really try to get this shape now. So I'm just kind of cleaning up. I'm double checking the widths of the top portion of my tail before I sort of add the shadowed portion. So noticing that underside of the tail, which is very dark right there. So I'm drawing that part from the base of his rump, and then it's in sunlight, kind of golden colored down towards the second half. Just because of the way it's turned, it's all the same color underneath, but because of how the light is shining, it's in shadow at the base of the back legs, but it's kind of golden colored later on there towards the middle right there. So just noticing that. Firming that up. You can see how that tail curls around, and you can kind of see the underside of the tail at the very point. And again, keep that kind of light because it's going to be zigzaggy when we add the scales. Okay, now going back, we're going to finish up the arms and the legs. And so you might want to refer to the picture on the left here. So we're getting the neck and the shoulder there and the forearm. Noticing that negative shape there between the cheek and the forearm. And then there's an angle to the, what would you call that? Maybe the index finger. And we see 3 claws, sort of different lengths. Double checking. Then getting the wrist and the elbow. So remember from those pictures we showed you earlier of the skeleton, think to yourself the structures that are inside the body, and that'll really help you to make sure you show those angles, because it can be hard when an animal is completely covered with scale or fur. It's easy for you to over round things. I'm double checking here. I wanted to make that angle just a little bit steeper and to make that knuckle show a little bit better of its index finger. And then it's got 3 claws. It's got 5 digits, but only 3 longer claws are showing. And since this is one of the arboreal tree-dwelling species, it's going to have long claws on both the front and the back legs to help it move and hang on in the trees. And I'm just drawing that line for the rock it's on, or the tree, whatever that is. Then its shoulder and its elbow. It's kind of bent a little bit. Again, just like us, there's different angles there because those different bones. I'll pause this to let you catch up a bit. So yeah, imagining those skeletons I showed you earlier that you can look back on in the replay, is that they have the shoulder girdle here with the shoulder, the elbow, and then there's the forearm, and then there's the wrist. So kind of make sure that you're thinking about that and noticing that. Again, if you can't, you can always watch the replay. There we go. So looking at that back leg, I know it's really, really in shadow. So you don't have to worry about putting too much detail in that if you're can't see it, or if you're intimidated. You can always put some bark in front of it or some grass or something. But again, the more you understand the skeletal structure of mammals, they're very similar to us. So again, it's going to have that ankle. The ankle is back here. And sort of the foot, the wrist of the foot is right here. And then we see the 3 main long toenails. Moving on now. So now what we're going to do is we got a really light outline. We're not adding the scales yet because it's really important first to show the three-dimensional structure a little bit before we add scales. And then you can add the scales on top of that, okay? And so again, if you don't have any of these supplies, you can either watch now and get some similar supplies later and follow up, or you can just come back later when you get the supplies. Okay, so we're going to keep going then. So one thing I often suggest, especially if you're new, you might not know this, is a great thing to do is to look at your animal upside down. Now, if you were going to see one of these guys in a zoo, sometimes they hang upside down, but it's a great idea to look at something upside down, and that really helps you to see not only the shapes, but the three-dimensional form. And so you can much easier see, I'll play the shape, the form, and how much darker it is underneath. Okay. And so sometimes that's hard to see. When you're looking at something right side up, your brain is saying to yourself, oh, that's a head, that's a tail. But it's not often saying to yourself, oh, that is, that's a light value or a dark value. Now, some of you were with me with the hippo workshop we did just a few days ago, and we did this same technique. Anyway, so, if you're new, you can just use a shading pencil here. It doesn't really matter what medium you use. The idea is to just look at the darker values that are under the cheek and the neck and that are on the legs and the belly and the base of the tail. So you could do that with this brush that I'm using with the powdered carbon pencil, or charcoal pencil, that is, or you could use it with, whatever medium, even if it's watercolor or colored pencils, just something that's going to be darker to help show that three-dimensional form first before we add the scales. Because it would be hard to add the scales first and then add the three-dimensional shading, because then you'd be blurring all the scales that you just so carefully drew. So anyway, you don't have to follow me exactly. I'm just kind of playing around. I'm making sure to look back and forth really frequently. And you might want to be looking at the picture to the left, because those, it's just a little clearer there where the highlights and shadows are. Oh, Eileen has a great question. If they lose a scale, do they grow back? That is a wonderful question. I have no idea. That would be good if they grew back. They are made of keratin like our fingernails, but I'm not sure if they're like fingernails and continue to grow. So I'm just experimenting here. Like I always tell folks, just play around with whatever materials you have. They may or may not work. So it's just, like I like to think of drawing as like a science experiment. I am a scientist. I have a master's degree in biology, and I worked for a long time as a biologist. So I like to think of things scientifically. And so I just experiment just like a scientist would, and you just see what the results are. And if you don't like the results, you repeat your experiment, and maybe you'll get different results. And so I'm just playing around, experimenting with this dry, stiff brush, and then kind of alternating with using my smudging tool. You could also use a Q-tip or your finger even. Although your fingers, you should have pretty clean fingers, because if they're greasy at all, they can prevent the graphite and charcoal from sticking to the paper. Karen, thank you for that fact that Google says they regularly shed their scales as they grow, and they can grow new ones. Fabulous. I probably should have known that, but there's so many interesting things to know about these guys. So whatever method you're using right now, just keep going. I am switching here to actually using my sharpened charcoal pencil, playing with it on its side and on its point to just add some more values. So all you're thinking about is values. I don't want you to really think about whether you're drawing a leg or a belly. I want you to just be looking at your critter and looking at how dark that lower belly and legs and neck are compared to the scales. Because when we add the scales, you can make it more realistic. Okay. And I'm just going to leave some nice light area around the eye because it does have eyelids like all mammals. And so we want to keep those. Just a sec. So yeah, so working on our eye, we want to really make the animal look alive and lively, and so there aren't any scales on the eyelids, and it's a little bit lighter colored. So that's what I did right there. Is left that. Now Samantha asked, "What is that dust you are using called?" I'll just pause this for a second so you guys can catch up. So what I do is it's a really ancient, really cool technique that's not used very often anymore, but that I love. And it's called carbon dust technique. And it's basically when you take a pencil, you can either use a charcoal pencil like I'm using, which gets really, really dark, rich values, or you can use a darker graphite pencil like a 6B or a 9B pencil. And then you just pulverize it on some sandpaper. And the finer grain of the sandpaper, the better. That's why this is actually a sanding block that is used for this purpose. But as a last resort, you could always use a nail file, although it doesn't make the dust quite as fine. And then you just blend it in. And the reason we do this is because it's just a really fun way to make very subtle, beautiful gradations. Now, I'm not gonna, to make it really beautiful, I could spend about 3 more hours on this guy. I'm just trying to show you in this free workshop the techniques, and that hopefully you can spend some more time later on them. But you can get very realistic, subtle, 3-dimensional gradations with a very slow application of layers and layers on your pencil, on your paper. Okay, so let's keep going. And Karen says, can you see the ear? Not really. You could look at one of the other images in the slideshow, like this one. You can see the ear back there. But the ears do slightly vary depending on what species it is. But basically, there's not much of a 3-dimensional flap. It's just a little kind of a curve that stands out a little bit. So, you can kind of leave it out if you want to, because that is also in the shade. So you don't have to add it if you don't want to. Okay, all great questions. Let's keep going here. So thanks for that question. Some of these folks in the workshop have seen me do this many times. In fact, I have done a different species of pangolin before. And I think that is on my website or Crowdcast page somewhere. And we've also done lots of other critters in this carbon dust technique, including tardigrades and the rhino this week. Or no, the hippopotamus. It was World Hippopotamus Day on Monday. So I'm just trying to get a little bit of the value everywhere, because the whole pangolin is darker than the white of the paper, right? And so we want to make the pangolin's back the lightest area, but it is still darker than the white of the paper. So this just takes a while. So I'm just kind of moving around like I usually do. I like to just work everywhere and then go back in different layers and keep going. Elizabeth asked, what species is this? This is the white-bellied tree pangolin from Central Africa. So now we're gonna, I could spend a lot more time on this three-dimensional shading, but we don't have time to do that today. I just wanted to get you started with the concept, and you might want to spend some more time shading before you add the scales. But I do want to just demonstrate kind of quickly. Now, in a previous workshop, I did spend a lot of time doing the scales almost exactly. But I figured that some of you might be new today and that might be a little bit too intimidating. So let's keep going. So I'm just going to do the scales on the head, noticing that those are the smallest ones. And then they're going to get bigger as they go down the neck and the shoulder. And then the ones along the top of the body are kind of zigzag because you see the side of them. And they're going to point up, and there's going to be some kind of white space between them. And again, I'm not doing a really careful job here because I knew I would be running out of time like I normally do. And then going down towards the front arm, showing the scales. And they're kind of pointed down, and they stop at the wrist where there's just skin. So there is a very particular way how they all overlap, but we don't have time to do that today. And if you want to do that, slowly, you can do that later and not add the scales now. Showing you little shadows on the nails there, the 3 long nails. Then noticing how the scales get bigger, going over the body. And again, I just kind of did these sort of symbolically as if you were at the zoo, or in the wild if you were lucky enough. These guys are very shy and it's hard to see them. So you're not going to get a chance to count the number of scales like you would on a pine cone. And I'm just making these little half circles, but really each scale does have a keel down the middle, which is like a ridge, and then it has 3 points on the end. But we're just kind of getting started here just to give you a start in this quick free workshop. And then his ankle there and the scales are overlapping, but they don't go all the way right there to the foot. They stop. And it's just skin in there. And then noticing the tail. So remember, there is a shadowed part to the underside of the tail, and those scales are kind of flatter, so they're not going to be zigzaggy. But the ones we see in the highlighted against the dark shadow are zigzaggy. So we'll just notice that some of this tail will firm up with a pretty straight line. And then the top of the tail will be slightly zigzaggy with those scales. So you can imagine how it'll be really easy to spend all day drawing each of these scales exactly. I did another pangolin workshop where we did all the scales this summer as one of my paid programs, I believe. Some of you guys might have been in that. So now doing the zigzag of the scales firmly highlighted against the shadow. And then how they go up, not along the edge right here, because we see some of the underside of the tail. And then just a few of the scales on the top. So we're just trying to get the gestalt of this guy. He's kind of cartoony, I know, but we got a pretty accurate outline of him or her, but you could definitely spend more time getting those scales. And hopefully you will, and you'll show your drawings later on in my Facebook group that if you are asking to join, I will click on that link later on. So now I'm going to add some shadowing because you notice that the sunlight is coming from the upper left. And so there's a shadow on the bottom of kind of each of the scales. And some of the scales are more obvious than others, especially the bigger ones on the back. So I'm just adding some shadowing on the lower edge. So again, you might not just want to look at what I'm drawing because it's sort of cartoony, but just noticing, in your pangolin picture, however realistic you want to make it. Just noticing that there's shadows on the lower side of those. And you could do that with pencil or the blending stomp or a brush, whatever you feel comfortable with. Now, just for fun, I'm going to quickly add the dark. You can see how fun it is to get some different patterns with this smudging tool. Just trying to get my stump here, whatever it's sitting on. I'm not getting it kind of realistic, but I want it to be darker, just like in the picture, so that the pangolin kind of stands out more. He's kind of walking on this stump. I just love working with this carbon dust because you can use sponges and all sorts of other materials to put it on. You see that since I'm using this blending stomp, it's kind of making these lines, but if I used a sponge or just some other kind of homemade thing, I could get a lot of different other kinds of textures you can imagine. And then getting really nice and dark with my dark charcoal pencil, just to really show the cast shadow of this guy or gal. And sometimes I'll use a point and sometimes I'll put it flat like this to get wider areas with that cast shadow we see. Okay. I think I just about almost finished. I had a little bit of, oh, that's right. I used a permanent pen to emphasize his tongue because they are hungry. Like I said, they can eat 70 million ants or termites a year, and their tongue can be as long as their main part of their body. So if you want for fun, you can add a tongue with a bunch of little ants later on or now, whenever. Well, we've come to the end of our drawing demonstration. I hope you've enjoyed following along while you learned a bit about the unique and endangered mammal called the pangolin. Visit my website to learn about all 8 species of the world's pangolins. See you next time. Bye-bye.